These were the words Krystal Evans wrote to authorities just 1 month before her ex-husband Tom Mallory ambushed her outside a Georgia courthouse and shot her dead in broad daylight. For 2 years, Krystal had been fighting for her life, documenting threats, begging for protection, and warning anyone who would listen that Tom was going to murder her. On September 13, 2024, just 2 days after her divorce was finalized, her worst fears came true when the man she'd been married to for over a decade pulled up outside the Spalding County Courthouse and opened fire. If you're new to The Only Witness, welcome to the channel where we expose the truth behind America's most shocking crimes. Before we dive into Krystal Evans's tragic story and the system that failed to protect her, make sure you smash that like button, hit subscribe with notifications on, and comment below where you're watching from. Georgia, Texas, California, Florida. We want to hear from our true crime family across all 50 states because Krystal's story is a warning to every woman trapped in a dangerous marriage. This is the story of a woman who did everything right. She documented the abuse, filed for divorce, got restraining orders, reported threats to police, and still ended up dead. This is the story of how the justice system failed Krystal Evans and why her daughter is demanding answers about why no one saved her mother's life. Krystal Evans was 44 years old, a loving mother, a successful real estate entrepreneur, and a woman who had finally found the courage to leave an abusive marriage. She lived in Griffin, Georgia, a small city about 40 miles south of Atlanta, and had been married to Tom Mallory for years, in what looked from the outside like a stable relationship. But behind closed doors, Krystal's marriage was a nightmare. According to court documents and testimonies from her daughter Precious Evans, Tom Mallory was controlling, abusive, and increasingly dangerous. The marriage had deteriorated to the point where Krystal feared for her life, and in 2022 she made the difficult decision to file for divorce. That's when Tom's behavior escalated from controlling to terrifying. For 2 years, from 2022 to 2024, Krystal Evans lived in constant fear. Tom began stalking her, showing up at her home and workplace, sending threatening messages and making it clear that he would never let her go. Krystal documented everything, every threat, every unwanted visit, every terrifying encounter. She went to the police, she filed reports, she begged for help. She wrote to authorities, "He's going to kill me." But the system that was supposed to protect her did nothing. Krystal's daughter, Precious, watched her mother fight for her life through the legal system. "My mum reached out over the course of a year, and they would not take her seriously," Precious said in interviews after her mother's death. Krystal had reported Tom's stalking and threats to law enforcement multiple times, but according to her family, her concerns were dismissed or minimized. The divorce proceedings dragged on for 2 years, with Tom fighting Krystal at every turn. He didn't want the marriage to end, and he made it clear through his actions that if he couldn't have Krystal, nobody would. The divorce battle was bitter and expensive. Tom was spending money lavishly, draining their joint accounts, and according to family members, he was also involved with other women while simultaneously refusing to let Krystal move on with her life. The financial strain, combined with the constant fear, was taking a toll on Krystal's health and well-being. But Krystal was determined to be free. She pushed forward with the divorce, attended court hearings, followed all the legal procedures, and did everything she was supposed to do to protect herself. On September 11, 2024, Krystal Evans finally got what she'd been fighting for. The divorce was finalized. After 2 years of legal battles, documentation, and fear, she was officially free from Tom Mallory. A judge also granted Krystal a permanent protective order against Tom, legally prohibiting him from contacting or approaching her. For a brief moment, Krystal must have felt relief. The nightmare was finally over. She was divorced, protected by a court order, and ready to rebuild her life. She had no idea she only had 2 days left to live. Before we continue with the tragic events outside the courthouse, make sure you're subscribed to The Only Witness and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. This story gets even more heartbreaking, and it's a reminder that restraining orders are just pieces of paper to men who are determined to kill. On Friday, September 13, 2024, Krystal Evans went to the Spalding County Courthouse in Griffin, Georgia, for a post-divorce hearing. These hearings are routine. They deal with finalizing details like property division, financial matters, and ensuring that protective orders are being followed. Tom Mallory was also at the courthouse that day. Despite the protective order, he was legally required to attend the hearing. The hearing concluded, and Krystal left the courthouse, walking to her car in the parking area outside. She must have been relieved that the hearing was over, that she was one step closer to putting Tom completely behind her. She had no idea that Tom had followed her out of the courthouse. According to witnesses and police reports, as Krystal walked to her car, Tom Mallory pulled up in his vehicle. Without warning, without a word, he opened fire. Multiple shots rang out in broad daylight, right outside the courthouse in front of witnesses. Krystal tried to run, tried to get away, but Tom kept shooting. Krystal Evans was shot multiple times. She collapsed in the courthouse parking area, bleeding from her wounds, while Tom drove away from the scene. Emergency services were called immediately. First responders arrived and found Krystal critically wounded. They rushed her to a nearby hospital, but it was too late. Krystal Evans, 44 years old, died from her injuries. The divorce that was supposed to set her free had instead marked her for death. Griffin police immediately identified Tom Mallory as the suspect and issued a warrant for his arrest. A manhunt began for the man who had just murdered his ex-wife in front of the courthouse where she'd been granted protection from him. But Tom Mallory had no intention of facing justice. After shooting Krystal, Tom fled the scene and went into hiding. Police searched for him throughout Friday afternoon and into the evening, warning the public that he was armed and dangerous. Tom knew exactly what he'd done. He knew that he would spend the rest of his life in prison for murdering Krystal. And he made a decision that cowards often make when faced with the consequences of their violence. Tom Mallory shot himself. He was found and rushed to the hospital in critical condition. He survived the self-inflicted gunshot wound and was placed under arrest while receiving medical treatment. Krystal Evans was dead. Tom Mallory was alive, facing murder charges, and Krystal's family was left to grieve and to ask the question that haunts so many domestic violence cases. Why didn't anyone stop this? Precious Evans, Krystal's daughter, was devastated by her mother's death. She described her mother as a compassionate, loving woman who had been trying desperately to escape an abusive marriage, and she was angry. Angry at Tom for killing her mother, and angry at the system that failed to protect her. My mum reached out over the course of a year, and they would not take her seriously, Precious told news outlets in the days after her mother's death. She explained that Krystal had documented Tom's threats, reported his stalking, and warned the law enforcement agencies he was dangerous. But despite all of Krystal's efforts, despite the reports and the protective orders and the divorce proceedings, Tom Mallory was able to walk up to her outside a courthouse and shoot her dead. The case raised immediate questions about how domestic violence victims are protected, or not protected, by the justice system. Krystal had done everything right. She had left the marriage, filed for divorce, gotten restraining orders, documented the threats and reported them to police. And still she was murdered. Precious demanded accountability. She wanted to know why her mother's warnings were ignored, why Tom wasn't arrested or stopped before he could carry out his threats, and why the protective order meant nothing when Tom decided to kill. They did nothing, Precious said, referring to the authorities her mother had reached out to for help. She told them he was going to kill her and they did nothing. Drop a comment right now telling us where you're watching from and whether you think the system failed Krystal Evans. Should someone be held accountable for not taking her threats seriously? We want to hear from viewers in every state about how we can better protect domestic violence victims. The tragic reality is that Krystal Evans' story is not unique. Every year in the United States, hundreds of women are killed by current or former intimate partners, often after they've taken legal steps to protect themselves. Restraining orders and protective orders are important legal tools, but they're only effective if they're enforced and if law enforcement takes threats seriously. A piece of paper cannot stop a bullet. A court order cannot prevent a determined killer from carrying out his plans. Krystal knew this. She wrote, "He's going to kill me," because she understood that Tom was not going to respect any legal boundaries. She was right. After Krystal's death, her story spread across social media and news outlets, sparking conversations about domestic violence, the failures of the justice system, and the need for better protection for victims who are trying to leave abusive relationships. Advocates for domestic violence victims pointed to Krystal's case as an example of why we need stronger enforcement of protective orders, better training for law enforcement on recognizing dangerous domestic situations, and more resources for women who are trying to escape abusive partners. The statistics are grim. A woman is most at risk of being killed by her partner when she tries to leave the relationship. The period after separation is the most dangerous time for domestic violence victims, and Krystal's death fell right into this pattern. Tom Mallory was charged with malice murder in the death of Krystal Evans. If convicted, he faces life in prison without the possibility of parole. He also faces additional charges related to violating the protective order and weapons charges. As of now, Tom remains in custody, recovering from his self-inflicted gunshot wound and awaiting trial. He has not made any public statements about why he killed Krystal, though his actions speak for themselves. He couldn't accept that the marriage was over, and he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one would. Krystal's family is left to mourn and to fight for justice. Precious Evans has become an advocate for domestic violence awareness, using her mother's story to push for changes in how the system responds to threats and stalking. "My mother should be alive," Precious said. "She did everything she was supposed to do. She filed reports. She got protective orders. She told them he was dangerous. And they let him kill her anyway." The question of accountability remains. Should the police officers who received Krystal's reports be held responsible for not taking action? Should the court system that granted the protective order but failed to ensure it was enforced face consequences? Though these are questions Krystal family are demanding answers to, Krystal Evans's murder has also reignited debates about gun access in domestic violence situations. Tom Mallory was able to obtain a gun despite the protective order against him. In many states, protective orders should automatically prohibit gun ownership, but enforcement is inconsistent and often ineffective. If Tom had been prevented from accessing firearms, would Krystal still be alive? It's impossible to know for sure, but it's a question worth asking. The case also highlights the financial abuse aspect of domestic violence. According to family members, Tom was spending money lavishly during the divorce proceedings, draining joint accounts and making it financially difficult for Krystal to maintain her independence. Financial abuse is a common tactic used by abusive partners to maintain control and prevent their victims from leaving. Krystal was a real estate entrepreneur, working to build financial independence and provide for herself and her family, but Tom's financial manipulation made the divorce even more stressful and difficult. As we close out this heartbreaking story of a woman who fought for her freedom and paid with her life, make sure you've hit that like button and subscribe to The Only Witness. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from one more time, and let us know. What can we do as a society to better protect women like Krystal Evans? How do we stop these tragedies before they happen? Krystal Evans did everything right. She recognized that her marriage was dangerous. She took legal action to protect herself. She documented threats she reported to police, and she got a divorce and protective orders. She followed every step that we tell domestic violence victims to follow. And she was still murdered by her ex-husband in broad daylight outside a courthouse. Her death is a stark reminder that the system designed to protect domestic violence victims is deeply flawed. Restraining orders are only as good as their enforcement. Police reports are only valuable if they lead to action, and warnings from victims about threats to their lives must be taken seriously every single time. Krystal's daughter Precious is now living without her mother, grieving a loss that should never have happened, and fighting to make sure that other women don't suffer the same fate. "My mum was my best friend," Precious said. "She was compassionate, she was strong, and she was trying so hard to build a better life for herself. And he took that away from her. Tom Mallory took away Krystal's future, her dreams, her freedom, and her life. He took away Precious's mother. He took away a woman who had so much left to give to the world. And for what? Because his ego couldn't handle that his wife wanted to leave him? Because he believed he owned her and had the right to end her life if she tried to be free? The tragedy of Krystal Evans's death is compounded by the fact that it was preventable. If the system had worked the way it was supposed to, if law enforcement had taken her warnings seriously, if the protective order had been properly enforced, Krystal might still be alive today. Her death should spark real change in how we handle domestic violence cases, how we protect victims who are trying to leave dangerous relationships, and how seriously we take threats from abusive partners. Thank you for watching this difficult episode of The Only Witness. If Krystal's story touched you, please share it with others so that her death is not in vain. Don't forget to comment your state and your thoughts on how we can better protect domestic violence victims. Until next time, this is The Only Witness, reminding you that if you or someone you know is in an abusive relationship, help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. Please reach out. Your life is worth saving. Rest in peace, Krystal Evans. You deserved so much better.